Hello everyone, welcome to chapter 1. In this chapter, we are going to talk about some of the terminologies about management of information security. I just want to warn you about this chapter. This chapter has a lot of terminologies that we are going to cover. So it could be a little bit boring because I have to define all of these terminologies for you. This chapter would be divided into 3 different sections. The first section would be just some terminologies about information security. The second chapter will be about attacks and threats. And again, it will have a lot of definition about various type of attacks and threats. And then the third will be about management practices. So I will create 3 different videos for you guys, and in each of these videos will have actually around 20 to 25 minutes of content. I'm trying to make the videos short so you don't have to watch this whole long video. So it's going to be 3 videos of each 20 to 25 minutes. And the first thing that I want to discuss with you is about the learning objectives of this chapter. So what you're going to learn after you complete this chapter. Some of the things that you will learn could be that you should be able to describe the importance of management role in securing an organization use of IT. Second, you should be able to discuss some of the characteristics of information security. Also, you should be able to categorize the threats of information security, and you should be able to list them. You should be able to talk about some of the key characteristics of leadership and management, and also you should be able to differentiate information security management from the general business management. So this is basically what you're going to learn at the end of this chapter. So the first part is basically I'm just going to describe to you about some of the components of information security. First, as you know, in today's world, we cannot do any business without the use of information technology. So information technology is a vehicle that helps us to do business. So what happens if this vehicle breaks down? Of course, the business will go down and a lot of people could be bankrupt and a lot of people could lose their job and things like that. So the concept of computer security is basically becoming more important in terms of the whole perspectives of IT, not just one part of the IT. So, and also the information security is not going to be only the responsibility of certain groups. It's going to be the responsibility of everybody in the company, of every employee, and also the managers. The companies, they should basically understand that information security decisions should involve not only the information security personnel, but also the IT people, also the other people who are in the other business units. So, and maybe in other words, we should say that it should also involve the communities of interest. So what is a communities of interest? Those people who are in the information security that protects the company's information assets from the threat, the IT people who support the business objective of the organization by supporting the IT to the appropriate business needs, and also general business, which communicates organizational policies and objective and allocate resources. So these are some of the community's interest that needs to be involved. So we keep talking about security. What is security? Basically, in the general terms, the security is being defined as being free from danger. So in order to be secure, we need to be protected from the risk of the loss, damages, and the other hazards that could happen. So basically, how can we achieve the security? Security can be achieved by applying several strategies simultaneously or together in order to protect us from the danger. Also, it is the role of the manager to make sure that the security strategies are basically planned, put in place, and also being applied. We have different areas of security, different specialization of security. Sometimes you might hear somebody says, oh, I'm expert in the security. What area of security? Are you expert in physical security? Are you expert in operational security? Are you expert in computer security, or another word, cyber security, or communication security, or network security? So these are just different specialization of the security. So when we talk about security in general, we are talking about all of these aspects. So the focus of basically mostly this course will be on information security, which is focusing on protecting of information and characteristics that given its value, such as some of the characteristics are confidentiality, integrity, and as well as availability. So the components of information security in here, the basis is based on confidentiality, integrity, availability. And we have the computer security is going to involve both the data and the network security. And we need to have a policy in place in order to be able to apply this security. And also the managers, they need to create those policies, and they need to apply it in information security and also the governance. There are some models in information security. Basically, one of the models that is out there is the CIA triangle. This CIA triangle, it basically focuses on three main things. The confidentiality, it focuses on integrity and availability, as you can see in the previous slide. There are other models as well. One other model that basically this book describes it here, it's called NSTISSI or CNS security model. Also another word for it is Macomber cube. So this basically, the Macomber cube is focusing on IT security perspective, IT operational perspective, and business perspectives. So if we look at this diagram here, in here we have basically the IT security perspectives, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So basically, how do we protect the information and making sure that it's not tampered with and provide access to those who need it. The second perspective is the operation perspective, such as storage, processing, and transmission. And how do we basically perform the basic IT functions of being able to secure and store and transmit our data. And the third part, or third dimension, maybe I should say, is basically the policy and education. So this is basically in terms of the business perspective policy that focuses on education and technology. So how do we make the rules for the employees about protecting the information and also how can we educate our staff in protecting it, and basically using the technology to be able to help protecting it. So the focus of this model is basically on these three dimensions, as I can kind of put it into different perspective, like information or IT security perspective, IT operation perspective, and also the business policy, educational technology perspectives. So the CIA triangle, as I mentioned, the focus is on confidentiality, integrity, availability of the data and the services that we provide. So let's look at each of these in details. Confidentiality is a characteristic or basically attributes of information that describe how the data is being protected from disclosure or exposure to unauthorized individuals. So basically, we can say information should only be accessible to the users who have been granted access to it and for valid reason, and only authorized user can use it. So to protect the confidentiality, we can apply different measures. One of them could be classifying our informations. The other one could be maybe we put our documents and data into a secure storage area that protects the confidentiality of our information. Another way it could be that we need to apply general policies and define some policies so that our data will have the confidentiality. Another way could be that we need to educate our staff, people, the end user who are using our system to be able to have that confidentiality. And another way could be the cryptography or encryption of our data. Integrity, basically, integrity is another characteristic or another attribute of information that describes how data is whole, complete, and uncorrupted. The integrity of information is threatened when there is an exposure into that can happen into the data become corrupted, damaged, or becoming destructed. So just a simple example I can give you, like for example, the data could be corrupted if we don't create a system that will define that. So for example, in our databases, maybe we need to define some rules and some functionality in there that, you know, when the student is basically entering the data into the system, it will have the integrity. So for example, for our database designers, maybe they need to focus on the integrity of data by providing different types of field. For example, rather to have this field should have integer rather than character. So for example, if there is a zip code that you need to enter, it needs to, you know, if you put a character, it automatically says that that's not valid. So in that way, you're protecting the integrity of your data. That means, you know, people cannot enter junk information into your systems. We need to also make sure that the data can be changed by authorized people. The next thing is availability of our data. So that's another attribute of information that describe how the data is being accessible and correctly formatted for the use without interference. So availability of information, that doesn't mean that it needs to be available and accessible to all the user all the time. It needs to be available and accessible to only the users who are authorized users, who needs to have access to those data. So only authorized user can access the data when they need to do so. So and that's something that you need to kind of make sure that you understand, that it needs to be available and accessible only by those authorized users. The next terminology that we are going to talk about is privacy. So privacy is information provided by a customer. For example, it can only be used in a ways that our organization has disclosed to that customer. So basically, in the context, privacy doesn't mean freedom from observation. It means that the information will be used only in the ways that is being approved by the person who approves it. Unfortunately, nowadays, sometimes the privacy of our data is not there because of some companies, they they sell our data, or because of the data aggregation, which I'm going to explain in the next slide, that could compromise our privacy. So another terminology is information aggregation. So as you know, that many organizations, they collect, swap, and sell personal information as a commodity. So today it is possible to collect and combine those personal information from various sources, and that means information aggregation. So you could have a database that could be used in a way that the original data owner hasn't agreed to or doesn't even know about it. So now there are some softwares that they can run so that they can aggregate the data, and they will bring data from various sources like social media, like different websites. So they can bring all of that into one, and they can actually, the owner doesn't know that that's happening even. The next term that we are going to talk about is identification. Basically, identification is in terms of an access control mechanism where unverified entities who seek access to a resource provided by a label by which they known to the system. So, and identification and authentication, they are basically goes hand in hand. They need to be there in order to establish a level of access, or basically in order to be to give the authorization so that the user can log into the system. Maybe identification is basically that user ID or any type of ID username that you're using. That's your identification. The next thing is authentication, which is the access also is part of the access control mechanism that requires the validation and verification of an authenticated entity's purported identity. It's basically, again, that goes hand in hand with identification, and individual user may disclose a personal identification number such as their PIN, password, or a passphrase. Maybe sometimes in a phone banking you have called and they ask you about your passphrase, and if you don't know, then they have to somehow get other information to be able to authenticate you to the system. Otherwise, they might not let you know those information that you want to know from your bank accounts. So those personal identification number, password, or passphrase could be used to authenticate you to the computer system. And also the next thing is authorization. So after you have your identification and your authentication, then you are authorized to use it. So basically authorization is there also as part of the access control mechanism. And so after the identity of a user is authenticated, authorization basically define what the user has access to, what is permitted to do, what can that person modify or delete, or things like that. So for example, if you are a payroll manager and you are logging into a payroll system, you are going to be able to see the pay of people. You should be able to modify it. You should be able to delete it. But if you are an HR person, after you log into the payroll system, you might only have access to view it, not delete, not to modify it. So your authorization is defined based on your access level. And another thing is accountability. Basically, accountability is also part of the access control mechanism to make sure that all action on the system are authorized or unauthorized. And it can be attributed to an authenticated identity, also known as auditability. So accountability of information occurs when a control provides assurance that every activity undertaken can be attributed to a named person or automated process. So somebody needs to be accountable for those to make sure that those systems are there. So accountability is also associated with system audit logs. So some way that you can making sure so those network administrator or network manager are responsible for looking at that logs, for making sure that there is a system audit log that logs in who logs in, who logs out, who has access to this, who is modifying this. So in that way, you have some sort of accountability to making sure that those authorized or unauthorized users have access to your system, and you can identify those unauthorized users. So this is it for the first part of this chapter. So in the next chapter, the next part of this chapter, we will talk about threats and attacks. So as I mentioned, this chapter has 3 parts. So this is first part that I finished. And so just watch the next video to know more about threats and attacks. See you. Bye.